Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us for the Gita class tonight. This is the first time we're actually going to be going into the verses of the Gita, because last week we just chanted the meditation shlokas. So from now on, each class we'll be having actual verses from the 12th chapter. And that has been over a year since we did that. But last week I did not explain the process of chanting the Bhagavad Gita Dhyana Shloka. So we're going to do that now. And last time it was actually, we didn't give anybody any text to use or anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the Bhagavad Gita Dhyana Shloka, the Dhyana mantras, on the screen, and you can chant along if you know it. It's just the first 5 verses of the meditation mantras, and if you know, you can chant along. Otherwise, you can slowly learn. It's a little fast, but we'll chant it together and see how it goes. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadishadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapane Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Duktam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Next time onwards, we will begin with that. We won't have any other speaking before that, and we'll have those slides on. And you can find the Bhagavad Gita Dhyana mantras in other books, in other places online, but we'll have it on the screen as well. So remember that the 12th chapter is the last chapter of the second section of the Gita. In this section, we said last week that bhakti, or also known as upasana, is highlighted. So the 12th chapter is going to be the climax of this topic. Krishna is really going to emphasize devotion. And it's really a good opportunity for us to ask ourselves, do I have real bhakti in the first place? I think I'm a devotee, but do I have any real devotion? What is real devotion? What is real bhakti in the first place? And if I find that I'm lacking in some areas, what qualities do I need to cultivate in order to acquire real devotion, real bhakti? We all know from our experience around Amma that bhakti, devotion is not a particular sadhana. It's not a particular spiritual practice. It's a variety of sadhanas according to the need of the seeker at that time. Amma advises us to do all different types of sadhanas, right? So initially, when we first meet Amma, our devotion starts off starts off superficially, and we're not able to sit or focus for a long period of time. I think that's how everybody was initially. If you had already been meditating before you met Amma, then think about when you first started meditating, right? You're not able to really sit or focus for a long time. So that means that even if we get a mantra from Amma, we might find it difficult to chant it or chant it for a long time. We might find it difficult to chant Amma's 108 names or the Lalita Sahasranama. That was the case with me. After I met Amma for the first time, I started going to the San Ramon ashram, and they had this song that they would sing, and it was the 108 names in song form. And I was so restless. I think it was 21. I was so restless. I just thought, when is this going to end? It's taking forever. And then later I found out there's something called the 1,000 names, and then I just about had a nervous breakdown. So that's how we are in the beginning. So also even doing pujas and meditating on the form of a deity, it's hard for beginners. We may only be capable of very small alterations in our lifestyle, but accompanied by a degree of loving remembrance of God or the Guru. That is what matters, though. That's okay, because that's the beginning of karma yoga. Doing your actions, maybe almost the exact same life on the surface, but throughout the day, off and on, you're remembering the Guru or God. This is the beginning. We basically continue our present life while trying to connect our actions with our beloved deity. You somehow try to connect them. You think, how would Amma want me to do this? Did I do this in a way that, if Amma did this, how would she do it? We start thinking in those ways. So it means our devotion is mostly karma, mostly action in the beginning, with a sprinkling of devotion on top. And as our love for Amma deepens over time, we come to understand that we can actually dedicate our actions to her. The action itself becomes an offering. It's an amazing realization. It changes our life a lot when we realize that what I'm doing, I can offer it to Amma in different ways. If I just remember her and then do it in a way that she would be satisfied with. That's important. You don't say, you're going to rob a bank and say, Amma, I dedicate this to you. That's not how it works. So, Lord Krishna introduced this way of thinking in the 3rd chapter, verse 30, when he told Arjuna to do his duty, surrendering all actions to me with your thoughts, resting in the self, remembering the self, in other words, freed from desire and the sense of mine. So that's the hard part. We think, I'm surrendering all my actions to Amma. But free from any desire and free from the sense that mine means I did this, I should get the credit for it. That's the hard part. We can't let go of that. It's so difficult for us. But this is the essence of karma yoga. Our actions are an offering, and the outcome is Amma's prasad. Because if we offer the actions to her, then it means whatever comes back, we have to accept it happily. That's why Amma says we should be prepared for all possible outcomes, not just the one that we're hoping for, because we don't know what kind of prasad God intends to give us. So the concept of karma yoga as a type of puja, that's what I talked about during the New Year retreat. And those ideas will come up again in this chapter. A lot of the ideas I shared on New Year's Day came from the Bhagavad Gita in different ways. But the more we practice karma yoga, the more our mind becomes purified. This is what all the scriptures say. And why does that matter? It means because we'll have less desires. So what's wrong with my desires? I like my desires. There's fun. Some people might say something like that, right? The problem is that when you're trying to do different devotional practices, they disturb you. People say that they try to meditate, but they can't because their mind is so, restless, and it keeps bothering me. So that's that's not just a coincidence. It means we have some desire or fear, which is tied to a desire, and that keeps popping up because we're so attached to it. And that's why all of our attempts at devotional practices and sadhana, meet with resistance, at least at the beginning. But as the desires decrease, the mind becomes more and more still, and we find that it starts to cooperate with our attempts to chant our mantra, to do archana, to meditate on Amma's form, and so on. I remember the first time that I went to India, I really wasn't interested in all these things. I wanted to go on a safari, really. And my brother was the one who kind of dragged me there. Bless his heart. And because he wanted to go for archana, I had to go also. And I couldn't leave because in case he needed something, I would have to be there. So I was glued to him and I had to do archana. Oh my God, this is taking forever. That's how I felt. But because I was forced to sit there with him through it, after a month or so, I was like, this isn't so bad. And after another month, I was like, hey, this is pretty good, actually. And by the time I left, I was doing it every day without anybody telling me. But again, initially, these practices are still a kind of action. We have a form in mind, but little by little, they become less extroverted. That's the progression that we're looking for. And it's those more introverted practices that we mean by when we say upasana. That's what is intended when we use that word upasana. It means pujas, bhajans, all kind of chanting, but we're not doing it like on a stage and listen to me chant this, don't listen to me, I'm going to chant some Vedic mantras like that. No, we're doing it because it's pulling our awareness inside. These are sacred syllables, sacred sounds. And when you chant them, even when you repeat your mantra silently, it draws your awareness inwards. So all of these bhakti yoga sadhanas should be taking us away from the superficial nature of our activity and our, even our worship, like a puja or singing a bhajan. It should become less and less extroverted. You should not even be paying attention if anybody's watching you or listening, when you're singing. Just try to merge in that song, merge in the mantra, all that. So as this goes on and we get to a point where we just want to do a lot of these introverted or internal sadhanas, it's not that we completely graduate from karma yoga. That some people get that wrong idea. We're just going to dedicate all our time to, the introverted sadhanas. No, it means that really our sadhana becomes more diverse. At least that's what I've seen around Amma. We still can't sit in meditation all day long. And if we could, Amma would say that's okay. But most people can't. So that means the majority of our time will still be consumed by some kind of activity. And we'll continue to offer those actions at Amma's feet. But we're also able to dedicate more time to internal sadhana like manasa puja, mental worship. And we start, having conversations with Amma in our mind. I know it sounds a little cuckoo, but it's better than having a debate with your own mind and your vasanas. Anyhow, there's a conversation going on in the head all the time, right? So why not just have it be between you and Amma? And you can get guidance that way. You can feel closer to Amma that way. So some people may say to you that once you have the right spiritual maturity, you can renounce all activity and just focus on knowledge. No more karma yoga, no more seva, nothing like that. You just, read books and things like that. If you look at the way Amma guides her disciples and devotees, however, we know that we all have to keep working no matter how long we've been on the path. Everybody is required to do some kind of sadhana involving selfless service. Now, I would say, at least for myself and probably most of you, this is mostly because we have so many vasanas and negative qualities that need to be purged. And the only way to purge those is through selfless service. The scriptures are very emphatic about that. There's no other way to remove the vasanas and negativities that we have. And even otherwise, we still need to set an example for other people. It says that even in the Gita, Loka Sangraha, so he says that even a jnani, even a knower of the self, will continue to do actions just to set a good example. Once someone asked Amma, we love it when Amma meditates with us, but Amma doesn't need to meditate, right? Of course she doesn't. Amma laughed and said, yes, true, but if I don't meditate, later people will justify themselves by saying that their guru didn't meditate. So if that goes for meditation, then it must go for selfless service also, right? If Amma doesn't set an example for us, then people will just become lazy and say, oh, Amma just sits there and does bhajans and sings, and meditates. She doesn't do any selfless service, so why should I? So she has to go to all the trouble of setting a good example for us. So we should follow that example. Somewhere, somebody is looking at us and imitating our example. So while we continue our worldly duties as a sadhana, karma yoga, we increase our internal sadhana, like having that discussion or having that interaction with Amma within, or imagining that everything you touch is Amma's, chanting your mantras silently throughout the day. All these kinds of sadhanas we increase. And that's what we mean when we broadly categorize sadhana, spiritual practices, as upasana. And the reason why we put those all in one bucket is because they all help us acquire more one-pointedness. It's called chitta ekagrata. Amma has talked about it many times, but it's actually the purpose of these these devotional practices. And someone might say, getting one-pointedness of mind? No, I thought it was to increase love. Well, is there any difference? We know from our experience with Amma that love is the factor that brings the most one-pointedness of anything in this world. That's why Amma can be so focused on each person who comes to her in darshan, no matter how many hours she's doing, because she has love for each and every one of us. I wish it were the same for all of us, but at least Amma can do that. So loving the Guru not only makes us want to serve her through selfless service, it also gives our mind a powerful focal point. Otherwise, our thoughts would be going all over the place. As it is, they're already going all over the place too much. So as a result, our karma yoga ultimately becomes consumed by the all-encompassing love for the Guru, that bhakti. Bhakti yoga actually, I would say, it seems to kind of scoop up all of our karma yoga as well. And then everything is just out of love for the Guru. So the gopis are a beautiful example of the yoga of devotion. Actually, that's what this chapter is called. If you haven't heard it, I didn't mention in the beginning. I took it for granted. The title of chapter 12 is Bhakti Yoga. That's why we're talking about bhakti and devotion so much right now. So the gopis were uneducated, they were young milkmaids, but their love for Krishna was so powerful that it evolved into the highest form of devotion. Their five senses were only capable of perceiving Krishna. Everything was Krishna. They didn't study any Vedanta, but they could experience the bliss of oneness with Krishna, only due to their pure love. That divine love blazing within them consumed their individuality and they merged in Krishna. This is how Amma explains it. Now, we might say, oh yes, that's me, I'm a gopi, right? But just remember that such bhakti, such devotion is exceedingly rare. Honestly, we all lack the inner purity that those gopis had. So we have to do a lot of sadhana to compensate for that. Why? Because so long as our mind is consumed by desires and not divine love, we have to go in stages. That's why we talk about it, and all the scriptures talk about it in the sense of you start with karma yoga, and then you really focus more on your devotion, and you offer your actions out of love to your guru or God, but it's more out of achieving more chitta ekagrata or one-pointedness. And then finally, we need to understand devotion in the light of knowledge, self-knowledge. This is again, the scriptures are unanimous in their words about this progression. In chapter 7, verse 18, Krishna himself said, of all the 4 types of devotees, he said, they are all noble, but the wise one, the knower, I regard as my very self. For with the mind and intellect merged in me, he is established in me alone as the highest goal. If you remember, last class I said at the end of chapter 11, Jnanadev said to Arjuna, said that Arjuna was about to ask a question. And that question I also shared, but I didn't share that with you. The question that Arjuna is about to say to Krishna is based on the last verse of chapter 11. So we have to remember that. Arjuna, those who perform all their duties for my sake and depend on me alone and have me as their goal are devoted to me, are freed from attachment and free from malice towards all, they reach me. So, I'm assuming that we all want to reach Amma. I hope that's a fair assumption. This verse, you can check it out, it's the very last verse of chapter 11. That's a tall order, very tall order. But Arjuna picks up that statement that Krishna leaves him with, and this question comes in his mind, which we're going to get to. But in this last verse, it can be confusing because he keeps saying my and me. What does he mean by that? Well, based on what we heard in chapter 10 and 11, he's talking about the universal form. His glories are all the glories of this world and the universe. And then he shows his universal form. So Krishna has been emphasizing the importance of devotion for the universal form. See a beautiful mountain like the Himalayas, that's me. So you should obviously worship them. All the ancient people had some kind of nature worship traditions incorporated into their culture. So this is why, because they understood that universal form. The whole world is God's form. So Krishna is emphasizing that at the end of chapter 11. So when we say the universal form is this world, the entire universe, it sounds like it's beyond everything, but it's still a form of sorts and it has qualities. So technically speaking, it does not fall in the category of the formless. But he still says they reach me. Now, if you rewind all the way back to the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita and other chapters where he talks about, in chapter 4 and 5, he talks about non-dual devotion or non-dual realization. We are led to believe that liberation is attainable only for those who have gone beyond all name and form. But now he's saying if you have devotion to the whole universe, you reach me. So Arjuna gets confused, and we may also. He's wondering which view of God is better. So should I be worshipping the universal form, or should I try to attain knowledge of the self and worship or meditate on the non-dual Brahman? So if you've read the Bhagavad Gita up until now, or sat for the classes up until now, really the answer should have been clear by now. But he's on the battlefield and he's really, he just saw the universal form. He's probably not thinking straightly, clearly. So Krishna patiently answers Arjuna's questions, just like Amma answers all of our questions. And that's what the beginning of 12th chapter is going to be. Just to show, though, that Amma has that same, maybe even more patience than Krishna had. She's the mother of the universe. She has that universal motherhood aspect. There's a story that one of the brahmacharinis told in Amritapuri before the bhajans. So on the live stream days, I'm sure you've all seen that some disciple gives a talk next to Amma. But that happens actually every day in Amritapuri. So on one of those days, a brahmacharini, now is a brahmacharini, but she met Amma when she was still, very young. And when her devotion to Amma blossomed, it turns out that she was in 10th grade or age 15. And still, especially in India, kids of that age are very innocent. So she went to Amma during darshan and said, Amma, can I come and live with you in the ashram? And Amma said yes. She was so ecstatic. The darshan, was going to be over that day. I think that was the last darshan. And so she got all excited and she's thinking, I better take some clothes with me and better get ready. And then when darshan was over, she was waiting by Amma's car because she's thinking she's going to go in the car with Amma and go with her because Amma just said she can come with Amma. And then when Amma got there, she looked at the girl and the girl was going to get in, but she happened to be waiting on the same side that Amma was. And she said, oh, how foolish of me. I should have been waiting on the other side. And so she goes through on the other side and Swami is there and she closes the door. And like this, the girl was asking Amma over and over again, when can I come? When can I come? And Amma told her, just wait. Finally, when she was old enough, Amma told her, you finish, this much education. I think it was a bachelor's degree or something like that. And finally, let her come. So no matter how immature our questions are, if they're coming from love, Amma's, she'll answer any number of questions. She's so patient with us. So that must have been the case for Krishna as well. So he's about to hear Arjuna's first question, and we are too. I hope you can see this verse. When we start a new chapter, we have to say like an introduction to it. You can repeat after me. That's how we're going to chant this. We're going to chant little bits of the mantras, and then you repeat after me, just one time. Atha dvadashodhyayah bhakti yogaha. Now we're moving to the actual verse that's on the screen. Arjuna uvacha evam satata yuktaye bhaktastvam paryupasate ye chapyaksharam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vittamaha. We're going slow because they're a little hard to pronounce, I understand. So verse 1, Arjuna said, those devotees who are exclusively and constantly devoted to you and those who worship the unmanifested Brahman, means the imperishable, which of them are the best knowers, or we could say, which of them are the better versed of yoga? It's really not a fair question to ask Krishna, but like we know, realized masters are very patient. How can Krishna respond which is better? Unless it's actually not a case of better or worse. Maybe it's not a question of better or worse universally. That's where we're going to head. The key question is, what does Arjuna mean by tvam, by you? Shankaracharya says that he's referring to the Vishwarupa, the universal form. So he means the universal form in the first half of the verse. Second half, he's talking about avyakta. Avyakta just means it's not manifest. So it's like, should I worship the ocean or should I worship water vapor? Which one is better? It's kind of a silly question, right? Those people who worship the ocean or those who worship water vapor, which ones are better? It's the same thing in a different state. So he's obviously confused. But the words exclusively and constantly are really helpful for us. Most of the time we are thinking of ourselves exclusively and constantly. But if we invoke the childlike innocence within us, like Amma says to do during the meditations on the live stream day, she says invoke that feeling, or imagine that you are imitating a 3-year-old child like that. So we can conjure up that childlike innocence, right? If we do so, we can think of Amma instead of ourselves. And if we're thinking of Amma as the universal form, then we won't be able to hurt anything. It was another day in Amritapuri when, some of you may have seen Amma play with little kids. She loves playing with the kids. And it was one such day, the kids are all learning music and everything, and especially tabla. It's very popular amongst the boys and girls too. So Amma was noticing that one of the children was very restless and couldn't sit still. It's understandable. They're like 4 or 5 years old. And she said, but he wasn't playing his tabla. So she says, isn't it better for you to play the tabla and then you get rid of your rajas, your hyperactivity, and then, you won't be so restless when you're sitting for bhajans. And he said, yeah, but sometimes I have to stop. And Amma said, and Amma also said that you've been fighting with your mom, right? And he said, yes. And she says, so you have the rajas, so you should play the tabla and get rid of the rajas, the hyperactivity in you. And he said, but sometimes I can't play the tabla too much. And Amma said, why is that? And he said, because the tabla is also Amma, and it might feel hurt, and then Amma will feel pain. Amma thought that was so funny. She laughed really hard. But that innocence enables us to see Amma and everything. So the first category of devotee that Arjuna is referring to as those who are always meditating on God's universal form, which is also known as Vishwarupa or Apara Prakriti. The second category of people are those who constantly worship, meditate on God's unmanifest form, which really isn't a form at all. It's like saying, what is the form of vapor? It doesn't have a form. Now we're not talking about microscopes and everything, just from the naked eye. So it is the formless principle of the Supreme Being. It is called Nirguna Brahman, the attributeless Brahman. Also known as Para Prakriti in, I think that was chapter 7. Yes. So naturally, worship of the unmanifest is nothing like our typical ritual worship. In reality, the essence of ritual worship is supposed to be constant remembrance of our God or Guru. So in that sense, yes, we can worship the unmanifest God, but by fixing all of our thoughts on the formless aspect. It's just not easy at all. And later on, Krishna is going to tell us that. So let us move on to chapter 2. Verse 2, excuse me. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Veshya Mano Ye Mam Nityayukta Upasate Shraddhaya Parayopetas Te Me Yuktatamamataha. So the meaning, The Blessed Lord said, I consider them to be the best yogis who, fixing their mind on me, worship me ever steadfast and are endowed with supreme Shraddha, which means faith in Sanskrit. We should get that part clear. If you've been to India or Amma's ashram, or if you're from South India, especially Malayalis, Shraddha means like attentiveness or paying attention, awareness in your actions. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Shraddha almost invariably means faith. And Amma's spoken on many occasions about why really they're the same thing. One-pointedness and faith, but that's another topic. We won't go into that now. So Shankaracharya also, in his commentary, gives a description of these devotees. He says, their faith is absolute, preeminent, and they spend their days and nights fixing their mind on me without a break. Thus, they are the most integrated. So we may say, that's me. I talk about Amma all day, right? Well, pretty soon we'll realize as this chapter goes on, it's not so simple. There's a lot of other prerequisites we have to fulfill to qualify and to fit that category. Anyhow, Krishna has given a very diplomatic answer. He didn't really say one or the other. Sounds like he chose the first person, but his words were very carefully selected. Because Arjuna's question comes basically from wrong understanding. So Krishna has to give an answer that seems to recognize both as best, because he knows that Arjuna is not capable of meditating or worshipping the formless. So he gives him a response that makes Arjuna feel comfortable worshipping God in the universal form, but also keeps the possibility for non-dual devotion also. So the word me can mean either one here, because Krishna knows he's both. So you can say me, and then he can say, well, if you're ready to see me as the formless absolute, then that's the one I mean. If you're only able to see my body, then you can use that one. He's ready. The verse adapts to the disciple based on their capacity. But it's the only answer you could correctly give Arjuna, perhaps. Sri Ramakrishna Deva once said, it is fine to meditate on God viewing him as formless, but do not think that only your concept of God is correct and the beliefs of others are wrong. Meditating on God with form is also a valid method. You persevere in your path until you realize God. After that, you realize that all paths lead to the same goal. Yes, all paths do. We just have to make clear that you don't practice all paths at the same time. There are different phases. We go through those phases, those steps, and we cannot practice multiple things at the same time. At least not exactly the same time. Maybe within the scope of a day, we're more karma yoga oriented, we're more bhakti yoga oriented. And then when our mind is really still, we might engage in some pursuing spiritual knowledge, wisdom, reading very high-level Vedantic books. But we're not doing it simultaneously. That's the point. So not only Shankaracharya has this approach, but Amma does too. She says, and Shankaracharya is simply commentating on Krishna's response. So it's Krishna, Shankaracharya, and Amma. All the realized masters will use the same technique. It's called Adhikari Bhedam. It means you treat the subject matter in a way that the disciple can understand, because people have their different levels of understanding and ability to assimilate. Arjuna is regarded as what's called a Madhyamadhikari. So what is that? It means someone who's in the middle. It's kind of called, sometimes called mediocre, but I would say that we are mediocre and Arjuna is way above us. We would be very lucky to be included in the category of Madhyamadhikari. And there's one level below that, and there's one level above. We won't talk about that now. So the point is that Arjuna is only fit for devotion that involves characteristics. He's not ready to meditate or worship the formless absolute. So that's why way back before in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna told Arjuna, he hinted to him that the life of a grihasthashrama or a householder is better. Because he's talking to Arjuna. If you read the Upanishads, which are the highest philosophy in the Vedas, those Upanishads don't really tell people to get married. Even though the guru may be a married rishi, he or she doesn't tell the disciple that, because this is a young disciple coming in the teens, often asking for spiritual guidance. If they're that tuned in, typically they will tell them to take sannyasa and leave the world. So that is a totally different type of student or disciple. So compared with Arjuna and us, for sure. So he's saying that, Arjuna, this is good because it's true for Arjuna. And another interpretation of it could be that, yes, devotion with form is indeed the greatest devotion. Because when you talk about knowledge-based devotion, someone who feels love because he has known God or she has known God, we could even say that's not devotion because you became God. Devotion assumes that there's someone who's worshipping and then there's a God that's being worshipped. But if you have knowledge of the self, there's no division anymore. So you can say it's not devotion. Doesn't matter. This is just different reasons explaining why Krishna is responding in this way to Arjuna. And Shankaracharya quotes another thing. I will do that later, sorry. So we said that Arjuna's question was wrong. In what sense is his understanding wrong? Let's imagine you ask Amma this question. What do you think Amma's response would be? Which kind of devotion is better, Amma? That of the gopis or that of the rishis? Those ancient sages that gave us the Vedas. How can Amma answer that? They're both supreme division. They're just different kinds. Excuse me. They're both supreme devotion, but they're just different types. I mean, I may be wrong, but my hunch is that Amma would say that the fruit of the gopis' devotion was the same supreme bliss that the rishis experienced when they saw the Vedic mantras in samadhi. So they felt that same bliss, even though they did not, live a life like the rishis did. Of course, if we want to get technical, the scriptures do talk about different levels of realization and how very strict about, you need to study the scriptures, go through that phase. But I want to make one point here is how meaningful is the distinction of subtle types of realization. How meaningful is that distinction for us? To me, it feels like a rioting mob of vasanas has breached the wall of the castle. This is the castle. And the king or queen is splitting metaphysical hairs about which type of bliss is higher, realization is higher. We don't want to go there. It's not relevant for us. For us now, simply acquiring pure selfless love for God is like the spiritual equivalent of winning the Nobel Prize. Just pure selfless love. That is an amazing accomplishment. So we should not feel like, we have to become a master on all these things and we're going to realize some new Vedic mantras. First thing is we have to purify the mind of all of our selfishness. So Arjuna's mistake is that he's asking a question without assessing his own level. That's why I'm emphasizing where our own level is right now. That was his mistake. He didn't do that. So we don't need to know everything about spirituality. We just need some clarity regarding the route map to our final destination, spiritual destination. We need to recognize where we stand, like the you are here of spirituality. And then we need to understand what is necessary for us now. So a better question for Arjuna would have been, which one is better for me now? Because that's the answer that Krishna gave him anyhow. Back many years ago, it was the second time I went to Amrita Puri, sometime in the fall of 1992. And Amma, I had a moment to be all alone with Amma. And we were talking about the Japan program, which had not happened the year before, because Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, and then the whole world in India went upside down. So Amma couldn't come. But the next year, Amma was seriously thinking of coming. So we talked about that. And at the end, I said, can I ask a personal question? And she said, sure. And I went through the translator, who was Swami V.1-4 Puri. And I said, Amma, whenever I try to do spiritual practice or whenever I try to meditate, my mind is always playing tricks on me. So how can I quiet the mind? Amma, so funny. First of all, she said, don't feel bad. It's normal. Before you weren't really trying to clean your mind. Now you're cleaning it. So it's only natural to see a lot of dirt. By the way, how much sadhana are you doing every day? She asked me. That is when I wanted to dig a hole and dive into it. It's like most days I wasn't doing anything. That's the problem. Maybe occasionally I would do something. I had started doing Archana when I was in Amrita Puri. And I did it for some time, but I moved to Japan and I got busy with a job and got busy in Maya, basically. And I stopped chanting it every day. I would do it on weekends or something like that. So I didn't have anything to say. So I realized that it was not the right question. What I really need to do is stick with the sadhana that Amma has told us all to do long ago. So, we really need to rethink our questions before we ask them to Amma. So the scriptures, like I said, are very clear in saying that moksha, or liberation, is only possible for the knower of Brahman, or the Atman. So because of that, some people criticize the practice of worshipping God with a form. They may say, all these temples, they're no good, God is not there. God is just a stone you're worshipping, right? But even though Amma knows that Vedanta, better than any of these naysayers, she's showing the proper way by recognizing both, with form and without form, and showing us how to reach the formless through the form. It's like saying, climb on the roof, and then, nope, you can't use a ladder. Amma says that the form is like a ladder. It helps us get up to the point where we don't need the ladder anymore. But you have to have the ladder to begin with. So these people who deny the fact that you need a guru or a god, they also learned that philosophy from somebody. So Amma says they have a guru. Somebody taught them that. And they come to you and they say, you don't need a guru. So it's a lot of confusion. Amma honors both. And her intention is to take us to the formless, transcendental God. And if you look at your personal relationship with Amma, we have both. We have Amma's form. We relate with Amma's form. But there's something in that relationship that makes us understand that there's an Amma that's beyond everything. And when we chant the Lalita Sahasranama, we feel like the meaning of all these verses applies to Amma. There's one beautiful one, Vyakta Vyakta Swarupini. It's verse 399. And I think it's a perfect verse for describing Amma. She who is both manifest and unmanifest. So the Amma that we can actually interact with physically, we need that, we want that. It's needed tremendously. But we can't always be with Amma, most of us. Even those who are in Amrita Puri, they can't always be with Amma. So we need that connection, inner connection. We need to understand that Amma is the light of awareness, of consciousness shining within me. So we understand that. We have that relationship with Amma. It hasn't become so tangible. It's not as real for us as the physical Amma. But we understand the dual layer. So we should be able to view Amma from both levels, shifting between the two as needed. But the overall route map remains clear. We start with karma yoga and bhakti with qualities for the inner purification. Then we increase the upasana, which is still saguna bhakti, or devotion with qualities. But we get more chitta ekagrata, more one-pointedness of mind. And as the vasanas are attenuated, the more concentration we acquire, the easier it will be for us to understand and assimilate the knowledge teachings, right? Jnana. How to understand God as the formless absolute. He's going to explain in the next verses. So the purpose of those knowledge teachings is to enable us to experience God, love for God, or love for our own self, the formless self. And the fruit of that is liberation. That's the route map. And Amma does not have to change her behavior in order to impart those jnana teachings to us, or knowledge teachings to us. It's our behavior that has to change. And you may have heard of this concept, Shravana Manana Nididhyasana. It means paying close attention to everything the Guru says, imprint it on your heart, contemplate it, and meditate on it. So this is really a beautiful manifestation of our love for the non-dual, or the attribute-less, formless Supreme. Because without understanding what to meditate on, there's no way we can ever have devotion to that. So he's going to give us a few examples. We'll get to that very soon. Amma says that we can take birth in a temple, which means we can have duality in the beginning, but we should not die there. In other words, ultimately we have to go beyond duality. So unless we are already planning on being reborn many more times, we need to understand those sublime non-dual principles behind the path of devotion. And that's precisely what Krishna is going to talk about in the next combination of mantras. The third and fourth verses need to be read together, so we'll do that now. Ye tvaksharam anirdesham avyaktam paryupasate sarvatragam achintyancha kudastam achalam dhruvam. Now this next word is rather long, so we have to pronounce it together. Otherwise, we'll have the same problem as the last time. Sanniyam yendriya gramam sarvatra samabuddhayaha te prapnuvanti mameva sarvabhuta hiterataha. So what is the meaning? But those also, you can put the also here, or you can put it at the end. It's put in different locations depending on the translator. But those also who worship the imperishable, the indefinable, the unmanifested, the omnipresent, the unthinkable, the unchangeable, the immovable, the eternal. Having controlled all their senses, even-minded towards all, and engaged in the welfare of all beings, verily, they, and you could put also here instead, they also reach only me. In other words, their destination is nothing but me, because they worship the Supreme in this way. So Krishna is talking about nirguna bhakti, means devotion for the attributeless, formless Supreme. It means Brahman. He's saying that these people too will attain him. Doesn't mean that just the people who worship the universal form reach. No, the people who don't meditate or worship any kind of form, they have no name except for Brahman. But even that, they're not meditating on that. They're just meditating on the absolute, formless absolute. So he says that they will get liberation, but he has to explain a lot of things about this. He says, first of all, what are the qualities these, what do they have to meditate on or worship? And then he talks about the qualities such seekers should have. So he has 8 points on what they should worship. Because you're saying it's the formless, well then I can't even wrap my head around that. What does that mean? So we'll go not necessarily in the order of the verse, we'll go in a particular order, mostly in the order of the verse, taking each word just briefly and elaborating on it. Aksharam. So this is the Sanskrit word, aksharam, means the imperishable. And the definition of that, according to the scriptures, is that which exists in all 3 periods of time. What are the 3 periods of time? Past, present, and future. This simple definition really helps us to do what we talked about in the last class, which was nitya viveka or panchakosha viveka. All these kinds of things need this kind of thinking. So what am I? Who am I? Whatever it is, whatever the real me is, it cannot change. It has to be the same yesterday as it is today and as it will be tomorrow. 20 years ago, now, and 20 years from now. All of those things should be the same. That's the only thing that is imperishable about me. That simple guideline is very helpful in us really meditating on our real self. Each one of these words that we're going to go through is a beautiful basis for a Vedantic meditation. You can also think of it as freedom from non-existence. It's never non-existent. Next word, the indefinable. The Sanskrit word is anirdesham. It's also translated as the ineffable. I think in a lot of Western philosophy or Western religion, we use that word a little bit more, ineffable. It cannot be defined or described. Now, those of you who are from Kerala might say, I thought nirdesham meant point something out, or instructions. Yes, it means that also in Sanskrit, but it also means ascertaining. So it cannot be pointed out, it cannot be ascertained. So think of this is another angle on Brahman, the formless absolute. It cannot be ascertained. Why? Because if you're going to define something, it always requires some kind of properties. You have to say it. You talk about the size or the shape or what it's made up of or what you use it for, all these kind of things. And whatever explanation you provide, it requires the 5 organs of perception to understand. But in the case of Brahman, or Atman, which is the same thing from the level of the individual, there's no properties at all. It's devoid of all properties. So how can I describe it? How can I define it? It is the attribute-less substratum upon which all attributes exist. So I can't. give you an attribute because it's the substratum of all attributes. So how can you perceive it then? That's just it. You can't. It's imperceptible by the usual methods because it is unmanifest. That's the next word that we're going to touch on. The unmanifested. In Sanskrit, it's avyaktam. So vyakta means manifest, avyakta means non-manifest. So the vyakta vyakta surupini. That's how we got that verse 399. So if it's unmanifest and I can't perceive it, maybe I can visualize it in my mind. I can visualize compassion, I can visualize stillness, peace, things like that. Nope, can't visualize it either because one of the words is the unthinkable, achintyam. It is incomprehensible, inconceivable. And when we need more elaboration, we can always turn to the Upanishads because they always talk about Brahman from different angles. It's very helpful. In Taittiriya Upanishad, chapter, I think it's book 2, chapter 9, verse 1. He says, the Rishi says, failing to reach the bliss of Brahman, words turn back along with the mind. So Krishna is in that same, position. He knows that words cannot reach the bliss of Brahman. So those words are only helpful up to a point and then they turn back, and so does the mind. It just can't reach that. There's a reason for it, which we'll touch towards the end. So after hearing this, let's say, okay, all this makes me feel that it just doesn't exist in the first place. No, actually, because look at that other word, omnipresent. If it exists, it cannot be omnipresent. It's all pervasive, free from spatial restrictions. Another beautiful word is unchangeable here, which in this case, he uses a unique word. He doesn't use this one in that sense so much. Kudastam. Kudastam, it means is the substratum for something. So kuda in this case is interpreted to connote the painful and impermanent Maya. So this world that's constantly changing, that Maya is kuda, but it needs a substratum. That's stham. So kudastham means the permanent substratum of this changing existence. That's none other than Brahman. That's none other than your true self, actually. We just can't quite grasp that. That's the problem. The next word that we'll touch on is immovable, which actually comes from these other assumptions we're talking about. Omnipresent. It's the substratum. Well, if it's omnipresent and the substratum, it can't move. Right? If it's all pervasive and unchangeable, then how can it move? It's impossible. It can't even be forced to move. Like winds blow the clouds, but it's not like that either. It's permanently immovable. So all of these points add up to one thing, that it's eternal. He has that word there too. So immovable was achalam, eternal is dhruvam here. So someone might say, once a long time ago in Amritapuri, one devotee and I had a very heated discussion after a Gita class. He was arguing that Brahman or the Atman is just space, Akasha. Of the 5 elements, it's space. And, at that time I wasn't clear enough to be able to, disprove him. But in the Gita commentaries, we see some of the commentators saying that no, it is not the same as space, Akasha. Because Akasha, yes, Akasha is constant. It's all pervasive and it doesn't change. But it cannot claim to be eternal. Why? You might think, space is there. It's been there for billions of years. It's eternal. not according to India's spirituality, because at the time of Pralaya, the complete dissolution of this universe, there's no creation at all, including the 5 elements. Even the Pancha Tanmatras, the subtle version of the 5 elements, nothing is there. Only Brahman exists, but it's unmanifest. There's no physical creation yet. So no space, no water, no fire, no nothing. I'd like to point out one thing that I always like to remember, is that all of these words are also used to describe God in the Christian tradition. It's just the pre-church version of the Christian tradition. The Gnostic Gospels, which are dated to the 4th century and are from teachings that existed even before Christ's time and during Christ's time and after, there are texts like the Sophia of Christ, Allogenes, Gospel of the Egyptians, and so on. And they use these words, same words, in their talking about God. So I'll give you an example, a passage from Eugnostos, Eugnostos the Blessed. This is how they're explaining their supreme being. He is immortal and eternal, having no birth, no name, a strange semblance that surpasses all things. It looks to every side and sees itself from itself. He is infinite, incomprehensible, imperishable, unknowable, yet he knows himself. He is immeasurable, untraceable, complete, lacking nothing. He is called Father of the universe. So you could say that if Brahman is the father of the universal form, or if the universal form were to have a father, it would be Brahman, because the universal form comes out of Brahman. So these seekers lived in a different time and place, but they seemed to have realized the same truth. Jnanadeva adds his own words about Nirguna Brahman. He's about a 500-year before us, lived in Maharashtra, a place called Alandi, I believe. And he adds his commentary, which is always very beautiful. No one can hold, he's talking about Nirguna Brahman, the formless absolute. No one can hold it in his grasp, nor could it exist in any form. It pervades everywhere and at all times. But even the thinking power becomes helpless there. It can neither be said to exist nor not to exist. It neither is nor is it not, with the result that no means prove effective in attaining it. So, after all these cryptic and abstruse descriptions, how in the world can anyone meditate on such a thing? We might think, I'm sick and tired of these explanations. Shankaracharya's explanation makes that meditation or that worship sound like the 7th step of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 steps of yoga. What was that 7th step? It's one step before samadhi. It's called dharana. Dharana it's second to last. It comes before dhyana, because dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Sorry. So it's the 6th one in the number and the 8 steps. And the way Shankaracharya explains this meditation is very similar to dharana. It just means a constant flow, right? And this is the definition that Shankaracharya says in his commentary. This meditation is a prolonged state characterized by the flow of an identical idea, like the flow of oil. So what is the dharana on? What is that constant flow of awareness going to be on? Well, certainly since it's non-dual, the answer cannot be that we're going to meditate on something other than us, right? We're going to meditate on a flower. No, that's not the kind of meditation we're talking about. We can only be meditating on our own self. The definition of Brahman is the definition of me. All of those things that he just said in the third verse, mostly, that's a definition of me. I like to say, if you go to a job interview sometime and you need your CV, just say, hand over this, as your biodata. I'm immovable, I'm eternal, I'm unchangeable, omnipresent, omnipotent. They'll be like, okay, next, right? So, but that is truly the definition of our true self. The conceiver cannot be conceived. That's why they say you cannot think of it. The witness of all the thoughts cannot be thought of. You can't define it because of all these things. It doesn't need to illuminate itself because it's self-luminous like the sun. So if you want more details about how to meditate on yourself, as Brahman, you can refer to Viveka Chudamani, verses 255 through 264. Beautiful Vedantic meditation there. I highly recommend it. I actually tuned it into a song once. Someday maybe I'll sing that. So now we say, okay, now I'm ready to go. I'm just going to try this right away. Don't forget. He has some qualities that we need to fulfill in order to practice this kind of meditation. So 3 main points about the qualities people have to have. He says, they have restrained all the senses. Oh no, I'm already disqualified. Just think, someone brings your favorite food, piping hot, you're the favorite way that you like it most, they put it in front of you, and your senses are just completely under your control. If you want to eat it, you're going to eat it, but no saliva comes or anything. It means somebody whose sense organs are very well regulated and withdrawn. So anything that you desire, or the opposite, right? Oh, that person I really didn't want to meet, he came in right now, or she came right now, what am I going to do? Those reactions are not there either. So that's one point. And how do you get that? The next point is even-minded to all. We need to have an even mind towards everything in life. Disqualification number 2 for me. I don't know about you. Maybe you guys qualify. But the point is not to be depressed and put yourself down. It's just a joke. But it's a goal for us to aspire towards. So don't get down on yourself. Just a little humor helps us to not criticize ourselves and hate ourselves for not, meeting the criteria. So even-mindedness can be considered the way to restrain the senses. Why? Because the reason why we don't have even-mindedness, whenever we feel emotionally disturbed, it's because of our likes and dislikes. We talked about this earlier today. So doing the opposite of what the mind wants can be a really good sadhana. Amma is like that. At one point I remember during darshan, something happened to, she's pulled a muscle or somewhere on her rib cage. After doing that, it was so long. I was a Devi Baba in Europe or something like that. It was just, who wouldn't have pain, right? But at one point it was obstructing, her arm or something like that. So she just stopped for a moment and said, "Mind, what are you here for?" That was it. It was an instantaneous transformation. She could tell the mind to just leave her alone. And then the pain was gone. The pain was there, but she didn't feel it anymore. So all of our likes and dislikes, we have to slowly learn to attain that state of mind, that level. And also, there are side benefits to it also, because most of our time is spent on trying to secure, acquire, or avoid these things that we like or dislike. So it'll be a great conservation of our time and energy if we can have that even-mindedness. And remember, it's Amma's constant experience. She sees nothing but Brahman everywhere. If you want more detail on this, you can refer to chapter 5, verse 18, and chapter 7, verse 9. And another very beautiful verse that will probably remind everybody of Amma is rejoicing in the welfare of all beings. Sarva bhuta hite rataha. That's another quality that these people have to have. Universal love, in other words. So we have to feel others' sorrow and joy as our own. We should never delight in others' failure or feel jealous when they have success, when they're successful. And whatever I wish for myself, I should be able to wish that same thing for everyone, even people who mistreat me. You can refer to chapter 6, verse 32 for a supporting verse. Now you would imagine that Amma has said a lot about this quality. So I found a few quotes to share with you tonight. Remember, this is someone who rejoices in the welfare of all beings. This is what she said. Children, find satisfaction in others' happiness. We are all children of one mother. The same eagerness which we have to apply medicine to our own burnt hand, we must show to others. The same consciousness pervades everywhere. Understanding this, always act with compassion. In reality, our biggest problem is that we only think of our own problems. Gosh, that's so true, right? We just don't think of it as our biggest problem. Only a person who has suffered can understand the suffering of others. That's why tapas, right? We do a lot of tapas. Then we understand what it's like, and we can understand other people's suffering. Children, try to hear the cries and know the pains of suffering people. I mean, all these things are a description of Amma. She's telling us, just be like me. But we're so dense that we don't get it, so she has to say it in words. And we can also consider these things to be prerequisites for non-dual devotion, or nirguna upasana, the kind of meditation that you would do if you worship the attributeless, formless Supreme. So we spent a lot of time on these two verses because they're basically a summary of the chapters to come, chapters 13 to 15. And I hate to say it, but in chapter 13, we're going to receive a huge homework assignment from Lord Krishna himself. What is it? It's a list of 20 virtues that we have to cultivate. They're all based on this one idea, Sarva bhuta hite rataha, rejoicing in the welfare of all beings. After hearing all this, we might think, this is just too much, I can't do it. Well, I need something to motivate me for it. Well, what's in it for me? Is the outcome really worth all the effort? Well, if you want to attain Amma, if you want to become one with Amma, you better believe it's worth the effort. So we will have more questions. I mean, we will have more questions coming, I believe. The previous ones we answered during the... No, we haven't taken the questions yet. That's right. So I'm going to give you a link, if I can get this thing working. I'm going to put a little link in the chat window. Should have put it in the description. I'll add it afterwards. let's see if I can do this without making a mess of it. Say a prayer from me. I think it went there. So you can, this form hopefully will enable you to send me your questions, and we'll be able to see those. I'll look at those next week when we have another class like this. All right? I don't believe we have any questions from today. Perhaps we failed to send out a link for that. That might have been my fault. So the 2 weeks worth of questions we will compile through this form. Depending on how many there are, we'll try to answer all of them. If we can't, we'll answer as many as we can. About 10 minutes of time. And then before we start the next verses from verse 5 onwards. Namah Shivaya. So the way we end these Bhagavad Gita sessions is that we say some closing mantras, Asatoma and also Loka Samasta 3 times. And then those who have time to meditate, they join us, and we will have a short meditation after that, and we'll end with one last concluding prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Namah Shivaya. So now we will have a short meditation. Those of you who have time, you can join us. Don't feel bad if you cannot join us, because it's understandable. We'll take a moment and get ready for the meditation. The purpose of these meditations after the class are to help us assimilate the teachings, so we don't just walk away with an intellectual understanding only. Take a few long, deep breaths. Close your eyes. Check your posture. Feel the body and mind relax further and further with each and every deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you, a powerful spiritual energy enveloping you, shining within your heart. Now focus on the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. Remain fully aware of each and every inhalation and exhalation. Be fully conscious of the breath. Heighten your awareness, your witness awareness. And let us direct that witness consciousness towards the body now. Observe your body. Try to see it as separate from you. Remember what Krishna said. If it is eternal, it must be the same in all three points of time, past, present, and future. The body has never been the same. It changes every second. Millions of cells die and regenerate all the time. Even otherwise, as a child, our body was much smaller. Ultimately, we'll become old. Our hair changes, our skin changes. The body is always changing. It cannot be me. So look at it as a witness. Now try to witness the energy level. Pranamaya kosha. It's the second of the 5 sheaths. So at nighttime, we feel one way, completely different from the morning and the middle of the day. You're probably feeling relaxed, a relaxed energy. You can witness that, the body level of energy. Somewhere may feel comfortable, somewhere may feel painful. You can witness that as well, because it is also constantly changing. It cannot be me. Now witness the mind. It not only changes in past, present, future, it is constantly changing. Any restless thoughts that come into your mind, simply stand back and watch them. Witness them as they come and disappear. and we realize that the thoughts do not belong to us. Now the intellect, our ability to understand things as a child was totally different than it is now. Even now we may feel a decline in our intellectual capacity, and certainly as we get older, it won't remain the same. Even in the course of a day, in the morning, our mind may not be clear. In the night before we go to bed, the same. In between, we have a clear ability to analyze. So the intellect, if we can witness those different states of the intellect, it means the intellect is not us. We are the witness of that. Finally, the fifth sheath is called Anandamaya Kosha, which we cannot experience now. You can try to perceive it indirectly according to the scriptures. Anytime you wake up from a very deep sleep, dreamless sleep, known as sushupti. When you wake up, take a moment to savor that feeling of utter bliss that remains. There's a small resonance remaining afterwards of bliss and complete nothingness. That's why we had that bliss. Nothing was there. I was in deep sleep. Meditate on that for some time, if you can. That is the Anandamaya Kosha. It's the only proof that exists of that. Let us conclude the prayer to Amma, that she will help us maintain this awareness that we are not the body, we are not the energy, we are not the mind, the emotions, nor the intellect. Even that state, temporary state of bliss after sleep, is not the entirety of our existence. We have to remember that, and this chapter will certainly guide us even more. So please continue joining us, and we will close with a prayer which we can make our prayer to Amma to make us complete. We'll chant Purnamada. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnād Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Namaskar, everybody. Hope to see you next week also.